just both come from the youth strike on Fridays. 6 weeks ago, two people who wanted to organise this sat down with me to get my advice on how to mobilise youth around the country. So what I said is, like, what needs to happen is you need to have a single event where lots of people come together, and then it sort of hits the critical mass, it sort of takes off. So myself and Millie were going, okay, so we'll have something on the 15th of February in Parliament Square, and Millie was saying, yeah, we'll probably get like maybe 200 kids down there, you know, and we don't want them going on the road or anything, and you know, we'll see how that goes, and then we'll build up to March the 15th. So like 6 weeks later, we've just come, we're both totally exhausted from running around, watching all these kids, young people, running around central London, blocking roads, having a fantastic time, and the whole thing's massive. It's like, what, 5,000 kids? Something like that, young people. Most of the people I've talked to think it's fantastic, right? I don't. I'm panicking because I've just done like 4 years of social research on what you might call social media fueled mobilisation. So it's happened over and over again since around 2012. And it goes a bit like this, you know, nothing's really happening, something dramatic happens, it triggers like lots of activity on social media. People are like SMMing each other, or Facebook in the Egyptian revolution, you know, the M15 movement in Spain, Corbyn in the UK, Sanders, all these things are sort of fueled by social media. And it usually ends in tears because, for the very reason it rapidly increases, it also rapidly collapses because there's no intermediate organisation. And so like the powers that be get off the hook, which is the main political point I'm trying to make in this video. If you don't want the powers that be, the rich and powerful, to continue in power, then you have to study how social movements form, why they're successful and why they're not successful. And the quickest way to make something not successful is for it to increase so fast through social media that it collapses under the weight of its own success. And there's two dynamics. The first dynamic is organisational. The biggest question in all social organisation is who decides. If you don't have a way of deciding who decides, then basically you get competing groups, a little bit like in the French mobilisation we've seen. You get 100 people with different ideas, and that might be great from a certain point of view, but it's a disaster in terms of bringing about progressive social change, right? Bringing about social change is quite easy because you can just destroy society. Destroying society is quite straightforward, right? You just need lots of violence. If you actually want something progressive to come out of it, and by progressive I mean that young people and old people and minorities are going to benefit from, then you need a democratic culture. And a democratic culture needs to be organised, okay? So what that means is you need to have grassroots groups, they need to have representatives, you need to have councils, you need to have proposals, you need to have leaders who are going to talk to the media but aren't going to like run off with the movement. So basically you need what's called democracy, or participatory democracy, and it's all been worked out, it's out there, but it needs to be trained. Okay, otherwise it gets taken over by people that don't actually have the interests of common people in mind, you know, they're demagogues or whatever, or it collapses. And of course nothing pleases the elites more than see social movements collapse, because that means they've got another 5 years to survive. Do you see what I mean? So the other side of it is violence. Like, what happens if a movement's unorganised and if there's ambiguity around violence, then it will become violent. You can absolutely guarantee it. Because as soon as a few people start throwing stones, the people that don't want to throw stones, like the young people or the old people or the people that are more vulnerable, will leave the space because they have the most to lose. And what you get is the young guys. So it becomes a young guys movement, and if it's just a young guys movement, you can guarantee that it's not going to get anywhere. Or if it does get anywhere, it's going to be fascism. So that's basically a summary of like social movement studies in terms of radical mobilisations over the last 100 years. So what the race is on, basically, what the kids have done and young people have done today is absolutely fantastic, but it needs to be organised. So what like social activists need to do is to facilitate that, and the devil is in the detail, obviously, and facilitation does not mean take it over, but it also does not mean let the kids decide what they want, because the idea of letting the kids decide what they want doesn't exist. It's just an abstraction. There's always going to be people in there telling the kids what to do, and a lot of those people haven't got their best interests at heart. So what we need to do is get in there and show them how to organise themselves through trainings. And the two big parts of trainings is having some structure whereby you can make decisions, and having a red line, which is no violence under any circumstances. And if you can do that, then we're going to take over the world. What needs to happen next is there needs to be meetings of the key activists, and they need to be told about the theory and practice of non-violence, which is, as I've said, if you're going to be successful, you've got to keep it non-violent. And secondly, they need to produce some general process of decision making, which has some semblance of participation and accountability in it. And then once those things are set, then it's all systems go. You know, this is not about holding things back. It's about getting things into a situation that you can actually get into the room with the government. And that's what it's about, right? So what Gandhi said, Gandhi is the godfather of non-violence, right? He's quite an interesting guy, so we don't need to get hung up on Gandhi, but we need to look at his methods. So what Gandhi basically said was there's 4 stages, right? First of all, they ignore you. They've been ignoring us for 30 years on climate change, right? That's because we haven't been doing anything. We've been sending emails and all the rest of it. They don't care about that. They're just going to carry on because they're making too much money. Then they're going to laugh at you. So this is what's happening, at the moment. You've got the ministers in Australia, in France, in Belgium going, the kids, they're stupid, they don't know what they're doing, laughing it off in some sort of arrogant way. Okay, so it's like you're on their radar, but they just can't, they don't. And then they're going to fight you. And that's the critical phase. So when they're going to start fighting you, right, you're almost going to win, because the next stage is you win. But where it goes all pear-shaped is when they fight you. So what that means when they fight you is you have to maintain non-violent discipline. Because what they want you to do is to turn violent. Because if they turn violent, you're on a terrain where they will win, right? If you want the statistics, 75% of the time, when people rebel against governments with violence, 75% of the time, the state will win. 25% of the time, you will win. But of all the times you win, 95% of those times, you will end up with totalitarian, authoritarian chaos within 5 years. And why is that? It's because if you use violence, violence is intrinsically authoritarian. So when you win, there will always be other people that will say, we're going to use violence against people who won with us. In other words, you have civil wars, okay? And that's because people have the culture of deciding disputes through violence. Do you see what I mean? So this isn't ideological, right? This is social science. It's not saying the people that use violence are bad or good. That's neither here nor there. What we're saying is it doesn't work, right? You've got 1 in 20 chance of coming through, all right? So with civil disobedience, which basically means thousands, 100,000 people, 50,000 people going onto the streets of a capital city, sitting there and taking whatever they have to take, right? That wins 54% of the time. So this is on this big study that's been done, and they've looked at 300 different case studies. So it's more or less the gold standard, all right? So maybe it's 50, maybe it's 45, right? But basically, it's a no-brainer, right? The difference is 25 versus 54. So what that tells you is even when you're non-violent, you're not going to, it's not a definite you're going to win. But that's the best way we've got, right? There's no other way. It's not like there's some third option. So you've got those 2 options, right? So if you are a non-violent movement, then there's certain non-violent movements that win more than others, right? So there's 2 criteria. The first criteria is it has to be mass participation civil disobedience. What that means is young people need to be in there. And by young people, I mean 10-year-olds, 15-year-olds, right? Secondly, it has to have old people, and it has people that are vulnerable, right? Like minorities and what have you. And the reason why you need all those people is because they give the moral power. Do you see what I mean? If it's just young guys, everyone's going to say they're just like doing some young guy routine. Do you see what I mean? So once you've got the kids there and the old people, the minorities, then it becomes a community movement. And a community movement is massively powerful because it's got that legitimacy. And then you've also got the numbers. And if you can keep it non-violent, one of the biggest dynamics is it's easy to enter that space. Do you know what I mean? You know, any old person can come down and join with those kids, right? Be 4-year-old, you can be 94-year-old, right? If you've got like young men on the street throwing stones, no one's going to be joining it other than young men who want to throw stones, because it's too scary, right? People aren't heroes. They just want to participate in something and they see, right, there's 100,000 people on the street, I'm going to join them. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is it has to be organised. So this comes back to what organising the young people. It's got to have a structure, it has a decision-making structure, it has to have a way of maintaining non-violent discipline, it has to have non-violent direct action trainings so people know how to respond to the police if they get hit, right? Because the police or the state are going to love it by hitting people and getting them to become violent back, because then it's game over. They can bring in all the tanks and clear the streets, and it's happened 100 times before, right? So you have to be able to take it, right? And that needs to be framed in a sort of sacrifice sort of framing, which is you are strong. You're not weak by being hit, you're being strong because you're saying you can do whatever you like to me and I'm staying there. And that's when the state collapses. You know, that's when the opposition collapses, when you get a critical mass of people going, you can kill me if you want, you know, you can put me in prison, you know, you can go after my family, but I'm not going anywhere. Do you see what I mean? You know, I'm over it, I've done. And that's when you win. Through fearlessness. You don't win by going, oh, you know, we can't have people out on the street because they might get hurt. Yeah, they're going to get hurt. It's called, you know, radical political change. You know, the alternative is we're going to go extinct, right? So, you know, this is not some pretty process. It's not some process where, you know, everyone's going to be all right. No, they're not. But it's massively more effective than violence. So that's the theory, really. And what we're hoping, obviously, in Extinction Rebellion is to spread this methodology around the world, right? Because for 30 years we've had, you know, particularly in the Western world, we've just had the NGO send an email, send a check, obviously hasn't worked. And then we just have violence, you know, with young guys throwing stones and all the rest of it. And everything I'm saying is not criticising them personally, right? You know, the guys in Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth, they're trying really hard, right? But it's not working, you know. And the people that throw stones and all the rest of it, yeah, they're great guys, you know, covering their hoods and all that. You know, they're really passionate people, but they're just wrong, right? Just because you're passionate doesn't make you right. You know, you have to look, you have to be like, get serious and look at the history and look at the science of it. So what I want to communicate is basically there's what you might call, you know, the standard model of how to bring down regimes or get regimes to seriously bring about structural change. So the first thing to say is it's over in terms of conventional campaigning, right? We've had 30 years of it. And the reason it's over is because we've all realised that it's not going to change because there's too many people making too much money out of destroying the world, okay? So that's just the way it is. So what we have to do is to find a method of struggle that is going to deal with that in the most optimal way, all right? So what I've been trying to communicate is the whole NGO thing is great, but it doesn't work, and the whole violence thing is great, but it doesn't work, right? So what we've got this thing which combines the best of both worlds, right? It's like, it's nice in so much as it's non-violent, but it's super disruptive like violence, right? So it's the best of both worlds. It combines the disruption of violence with the friendliness, as you might say, of you know, just sending emails and all the rest of it. So what this civil resistance model means is really actually straightforward. I mean, obviously there's variations on the theme, but it means this. There's some number of key criteria. First of all, you have to go to the capital city. Why? Because that's where the elites are, that's where the government is, that's where the rich and powerful are, and all the rest of it. And you have to disrupt their lives. Like, they're not bothered about people doing things in the jungle or, you know, on the periphery. That's just like whatever for them. But if you're going to block like Westminster for a week, they're going to get upset. You can absolutely guarantee that, right? So the second thing is, obviously, as we've talked about, it's got to be non-violent. because lots of people are going to come down onto the streets of the capital and they haven't heard anything about non-violence, and you need to have pieces of paper and people going around going, this is the deal, right? And if you think that might be difficult, it's not difficult as long as you've set that culture already in train. Do you see what I mean? Because most people are herd animal types, then they're just going to go, they're going to be non-violent, so I'm not. Do you see what I mean? So that's the second thing. The third thing is you need a load of people to do it, all right? Not millions, right? You don't need a national uprising. You need something between 20 and 30,000 people. And then this is what happens. You've got those three criteria: capital city, non-violence, and lots of people. There is a fourth criteria, it's got to be fun, right? So all these big mobilizations, they have, you know, pop stars coming and singing and theatre and just sandpits for the kids, you know what I mean? You're basically prefiguring a society as through your resistance struggle, okay? So work that one out. It's going to be interesting. Okay, so what is the plan? So what we're going to do is what's been happening in the Global South for the last 50, 100 years is we're going to be following the Global South civil resistance model, right? Which has been massively successful. It's successful about every 2 or 3 years in terms of bringing down governments or creating structural change. So we're going to go down to London with our 10 to 20,000 people. We're going to be in several locations, and then we're just going to be sitting in the streets having a nice time. And the other critical thing is it's got to keep going, right? So, you know, the really useless thing is to have an A to B march, right? The second most useless thing is to have civil resistance for one day, which is what we've just seen now, right? I mean, it's great, but that's not going to make the government listen. You know, they're just going to read it in the paper tomorrow morning and go, yeah, that was interesting. What takes it into the stratosphere of political effectiveness is day after day. Why is that? It's the same principle as a strike. If you go on strike, you know, there's a tube strike. For the first day, no one's really bothered, right? Second day, whatever, people are pissed off. Third day, people are mad, right? You know, and the employers are mad. And that's what brings them to the table, right? Because like most shops in London, for instance, there's 3 days supply of food, okay? So day 3 is D-Day. Do you see what I mean? So they're going to have to do something. So what are they going to do? And the beauty of the civil resistance model is that whatever they do, you've already won. So this is the thing to communicate to everyone who comes down in April, is we've already won, right? Why? Because whatever they've done, whatever they do, we've got to win. So what can they do? They can leave you to blockade central London, right? If they do that, there's going to be massive publicity around the world, and the elites and the rich and powerful are going to lose loads of money, right? In other words, they're not going to go for that option. They cannot go for that option, because after day 3, day 4, the government is going to be told by the rich and powerful they should do something, right? Okay, so what's the other option? The other option is to use repression, right? So again, there's 2 options, right? They can be violent or non-violent towards us. If they're non-violent, they're basically going to have to arrest thousands of people. If they arrest thousands of people, that'll be the first time since, you know, in 50 or 100 years in a Western country that thousands of people are being arrested for organised civil disobedience. It's going to be around the globe. It's going to be loads of publicity. So if they let it happen, there's going to be loads of publicity, and if they repress it, there's going to be loads of publicity. And the other sub-option there is they come and use violence. If the state used violence, you know it's on its last legs. This is the main thing to communicate. A lot of people come to XR and they go, yeah, but what happens if they use violence? The answer to that is they're on the last legs. They're on the last legs. I mean, they may succeed, but they've lost all their legitimacy. And the next time you come out on the street, there'll be hundreds and thousands of people, because they'll be going, we're not having this. You know, we're not having riot police destroying the British public. Do you know what I mean? That's not what we do. And it'll be the same in any country. And this is where the penny drops, as it were, is why is it successful in the Global South? Paradoxically, because the state uses violence. And if you use violence against people, every person you use violence against who maintains non-violent discipline, you can guarantee 5, 10 more people will come into that space and go, you hit my sister, my mum, my child, I am coming down tomorrow. Do you see what I mean? So once the state takes less people out than come into the space, it's game over. Do you see what I mean? So they can arrest thousands of people, and the throw of the dice is people will see, like, let's say they see like 1,000 people arrested, right? We only need another 1,000, 2,000 people to come into that space for them to be back to square one. So they're basically, it's checkmate in terms of strategy. It's checkmate for them. And this has happened over and over again, right? It's not guaranteed, but to say it won't happen is just completely, you know, social scientifically illiterate. It happens over and over and over again. And what's interesting here, of course, is that it's basically happening in a Western democracy for the first time. Democracy, in inverted commas. Do you see what I mean? So what's the third option? So the third option is they call you into the room, right? So this is what happens over and over again. It's labour strikes, right? Everyone knows it. Since 1880, around the world, there's been hundreds and thousands of labour strikes, okay? People, you know, remove their labour, the employers go, no, you know, and after a while they go, okay, you know, we're losing too much money. They look at, you know, the accountant comes in and says, whatever, you know, you're losing money. They call them into a room and you do a deal. So that's what the government will do. They'll go, okay, so how many carbon emissions do you want us to reduce? Because that's what we do, you know, it's not a money thing, right? It's carbon. It's like pollution, poison in the atmosphere that's going to kill the next generation. And then my personal orientation is like the young people go in because it's their deal, and the young people go, right, we want 0 carbon emissions by 2025. And then Theresa May or whoever will go, that's ridiculous. And then the kids will come out and they'll go, those people basically want to see us dead. And so we're carrying on. And then you roll the dice again. But whatever happens is it's going to be game over for the system in the next 2 years, you know, as long as we can maintain non-violent discipline. So that's the challenge for everyone watching this video, is because the system's already toast, right? It's like 2007 times 1,000, you know. The system is going to collapse because it's destroying itself. It might be in 6 months' time, might be in 2 years' time, 5 years' time, but it's going. So the key question is whether we're going to have fascism or something vaguely progressive. That's the choice now, not whether neoliberalism is going to survive, right? That's gone. You know, it's destroyed itself. You know, carbon emissions are going up. So it's driving us off the cliff, literally, in physics, isn't it? So let's get to it.